Sydney versus Melbourne. Which city will win in 2026? Today, we're diving into one of Australia's most heated debates, Sydney versus Melbourne. But we're not just rehashing the same old arguments. We're looking ahead to 2026 and asking the big question, which city is going to come out on top? Now, I know what you're thinking. This rivalry has been going on forever, right? Sydneysiders love their harbor and sunshine. Melburnians pride themselves on their coffee and culture. But here's the thing. Both cities are evolving rapidly, and the factors that make a city better are changing too. In this deep dive, we're going to break down everything: cost of living, job opportunities, lifestyle, culture, weather, infrastructure, and future developments. We'll look at the data, we'll examine the trends, and by the end of this video, you'll have a clear picture of what each city offers heading into 2026. Whether you're thinking about moving, planning a visit, or just love a good rivalry, this video is for you. So let's settle this debate once and for all. Or at least, let's try. The money talk. Cost of living. Let's start with something that affects everyone: money. Because let's be honest, you can love a city all you want, but if you can't afford to live there comfortably, what's the point? Sydney has long been known as Australia's most expensive city, and guess what? That hasn't changed. If we look at current data, to maintain the same standard of living, you'd need about $11,000 a month in Sydney compared to around $9,500 in Melbourne. That's a significant difference. Let's break that down further. Housing is the biggest expense for most people. In Sydney's city center, a one-bedroom apartment will set you back around $3,200 a month. In Melbourne, about $2,200. That's a $1,000 difference every single month. Over a year, that's $12,000 you could be saving or spending on experiences instead of rent. Even if you move to the suburbs, Sydney's rent is still about 15 to 20% higher than Melbourne's. So if you're someone who's looking to stretch your dollar further, Melbourne has a clear advantage here. But it's not just rent. Let's talk utilities. In Sydney, you're looking at around $245 a month for electricity, water, and gas. In Melbourne, it's about $230. Not a massive difference, but it adds up. Groceries. Pretty similar across both cities, though Sydney can be slightly more expensive for certain items, especially if you're shopping in trendy suburbs. Eating out and entertainment is where Melbourne can actually compete or even beat Sydney on price. Melbourne's famous for its hidden laneway cafes and restaurants that offer incredible value. Sure, you can find expensive places in both cities, but Melbourne's food scene tends to be more accessible at every price point. Transport costs are comparable. Both cities have decent public transport systems, and monthly passes run you around the same price. If you're driving, petrol prices fluctuate but are generally similar. So here's the bottom line. Sydney is more expensive, period. Your salary needs to be higher to maintain the same lifestyle. Melbourne gives you more bang for your buck, especially when it comes to housing. If cost of living is your top priority, Melbourne takes this round. Show me the money. Job market and economy. All right, so Melbourne might be cheaper, but what's the point if you can't find a good job? Let's talk about the job market and economic opportunities heading into 2026. Sydney is Australia's financial capital. There's no way around it. If you're in finance, banking, insurance, or corporate services, Sydney is where the action is. The CBD is packed with major banks, investment firms, and multinational corporations. The average salaries in these sectors tend to be higher in Sydney than anywhere else in Australia. Tech is booming in Sydney too. The city's tech industry is seeing about 15% growth, with huge demand for software engineers, UX designers, data scientists, and cybersecurity specialists. Companies like Atlassian, Canva, and numerous startups are actively hiring. The tech startup scene in Sydney is vibrant, especially around areas like Surrey Hills and the new Tech Central precinct. But here's where it gets interesting. Melbourne is no slouch in the job department. In fact, Melbourne's job market is incredibly diverse. While Sydney might have the edge in finance, Melbourne dominates in other sectors. Healthcare and social assistance, education, and professional services are massive in Melbourne. By 2026, Melbourne's healthcare sector alone is expected to add over 60,000 new jobs. Melbourne is also becoming a serious tech hub. The city has been investing heavily in innovation precincts, and there's a growing startup ecosystem that rivals Sydney's. Plus, Melbourne has a strong manufacturing base, which Sydney has largely lost. With the push for clean energy and advanced manufacturing, Melbourne could see significant growth in these areas. The creative industries are another area where Melbourne shines. If you're in media, arts, design, fashion, and entertainment, Melbourne has more opportunities and a more supportive creative community. Sydney has glitz and glamour, sure, but Melbourne has depth in the creative sector. Let's talk about job stability and growth projections. Both cities are expected to see strong job growth through 2026, but in different sectors. Sydney's growth is concentrated in finance, tech, and property. Melbourne's growth is more spread out across healthcare, education, professional services, and construction. Remote work has changed the game, too. Many companies now offer flexible arrangements, which means you could work for a Sydney company while living in Melbourne, or vice versa. This is particularly common in tech and professional services. Salaries? On average, Sydney pays a little more, but remember what we talked about earlier regarding cost of living. Your after-tax salary in Melbourne covers living expenses for about 1.8 months compared to 1.5 months in Sydney. So even if Sydney pays more on paper, Melbourne might give you better actual purchasing power. Unemployment rates are similar in both cities, hovering around healthy levels. The job market in both is competitive, but opportunities exist if you have the right skills. So who wins the job market battle? It depends on your industry. Finance and high-level corporate? Sydney. Healthcare, education, creative industries, and diverse opportunities? Melbourne. It's more of a draw than a clear winner. Lifestyle and culture. Now let's get into the fun stuff. Lifestyle and culture. This is where personal preference really comes into play, but there are some objective differences worth discussing. Sydney is all about that outdoor lifestyle. The harbor is obviously the centerpiece. You've got iconic beaches like Bondi, Manly, and Coogee. The coastal walk from Bondi to Coogee is absolutely stunning. On a beautiful Sydney day, and there are plenty of them, there's nowhere else in the world you'd rather be. The harbor foreshore, the beaches, the outdoor dining culture, it's spectacular. Sydney also has major events and attractions. New Year's Eve fireworks, Vivid Sydney, the Opera House, Harbour Bridge. These aren't just tourist attractions. They're part of living in Sydney. The city has an energy and vibrancy that comes from being Australia's biggest city and global gateway. But here's the thing about Sydney. It can feel a bit surface level at times. Beautiful, absolutely, but some people find it lacks the depth and authenticity of Melbourne. Melbourne, on the other hand, is about hidden gems and layers. The laneways, the rooftop bars, the underground music scene, the art installations that pop up everywhere. Melbourne is the kind of city where you can live for years and still discover new favorite spots. The coffee culture in Melbourne is legendary, and yes, it really is that good. But it's not just about coffee. It's about the cafe culture, the fact that every neighborhood has its own character and its own collection of independent shops and restaurants. Sports are huge in both cities, but in different ways. Sydney has the NRL and a growing AFL presence. Melbourne is the spiritual home of AFL, and the city goes absolutely crazy for it. The Melbourne Cup, the Australian Open tennis, the Boxing Day Test match at the MCG, sport is woven into Melbourne's identity. Arts and culture, Melbourne takes this hands down. More theaters, more live music venues, more galleries, more cultural festivals. Melbourne has been called Australia's cultural capital for good reason. If you're into arts, music, theater, or just appreciate a city with cultural depth, Melbourne is your place. Food scene? Both cities are world-class, but different. Sydney has stunning waterfront dining and tends toward fresh, light coastal cuisine. Melbourne has more variety, more international options, and that famous laneway cafe culture. Melbourne also has a stronger emphasis on food as an experience, not just sustenance. Nightlife? Sydney's lockout laws hurt it badly for years, though they've been relaxed. Melbourne has always had a more vibrant late-night scene, with more options for bars, clubs, and live music venues. Family life? Both cities offer great options. Sydney has beaches and outdoor activities. Melbourne has great parks like the Royal Botanic Gardens and excellent family-friendly neighborhoods. Schools and education quality are comparable in both cities. Social scene? Sydney can feel a bit cliquey and focused on appearances. There's definitely a social hierarchy that some find off-putting. Melbourne tends to be more relaxed and accepting. It's easier to find your tribe in Melbourne, whatever your interests are. The pace of life is different too. Sydney moves faster. It's more competitive, more hustle and bustle. Melbourne has more laid-back vibe. People actually seem to enjoy their lives rather than just rushing through them. So, lifestyle and culture? It depends what you value. Beaches, harbor, outdoor beauty? Sydney wins. Arts, culture, food scene, laid-back vibe? Melbourne takes it. The weather debate. Let's address the elephant in the room, weather. Because if you ask a Sydney sider what's wrong with Melbourne, the first thing they'll mention is the weather. Sydney has objectively better weather. Let's just get that out of the way. More sunny days, warmer temperatures, milder winters. The average temperature in Sydney is consistently a few degrees warmer than Melbourne across all seasons. Sydney winters are gentle. You might need a light jacket, but you're not suffering. Summer in Sydney can get hot, don't get me wrong, but you've got beaches everywhere to cool off. The humidity can be intense, especially in January and February, but most people adapt. Melbourne's weather? It's famously unpredictable. The phrase 4 seasons in one day exists for a reason. You can start the day in sunshine, experience a cold snap by lunch, get rained on in the afternoon, and end with a beautiful evening. It keeps you on your toes. Melbourne winters are properly cold. You need real coats, scarves, heating. It gets dark early. If you have seasonal affective disorder or just really hate cold weather, Melbourne winters can be tough. But here's the counter-argument. Melbourne's weather creates a different kind of city culture. The cafe culture partially exists because you need warm places to hang out. The art scene thrives partly because people are indoors more. And honestly, some people find Melbourne's weather more interesting than Sydney's predictable sunshine. Melbourne also gets hot in summer, sometimes hotter than Sydney. The difference is it's a dry heat rather than humid, and some people prefer that. Rain? Melbourne gets less total rainfall than Sydney, but it's more spread out. Sydney gets heavy downpours, especially in summer. Melbourne gets more consistent drizzle. Look, if weather is a top priority for you, Sydney wins, no contest. But it's worth noting that plenty of people love Melbourne despite the weather, or even because of it. The weather creates character. Infrastructure and livability. Let's talk about the practical stuff. Infrastructure, transport, planning, and overall livability as we head into 2026. Public transport is a big deal in both cities. Sydney has trains, buses, light rail, and ferries. The network is extensive, but it can be unreliable. There are frequent delays, and the system can feel overcrowded during peak times. Sydney's also still working on integrating its various transport modes seamlessly. Melbourne has trains, trams, and buses. The tram network is the largest in the world and gives Melbourne a unique character. It's also incredibly useful for getting around the inner suburbs and CBD. Melbourne's public transport can also be unreliable, with its own share of delays and issues, but many find it more navigable than Sydney's system. Both cities are investing heavily in transport infrastructure. Sydney has the Metro project, which is game-changing. The new metro lines are modern, reliable, and fast. By 2026, more of these will be operational, significantly improving Sydney's transport situation. Melbourne is building the Metro Tunnel, which will ease congestion in the city loop. There are also new suburban rail lines being planned. Both cities are working toward better transport, but these are long-term projects. Traffic? Both cities have terrible traffic. Sydney's harbour geography means limited routes across the city, creating bottlenecks. Melbourne's more spread-out layout means long commute times. If you're driving, neither city is particularly pleasant during peak hours. Urban planning? This is interesting. Sydney is constrained by geography. The harbour, the national parks, the topography. This creates a beautiful city, but also limits expansion and makes housing expensive. Sydney is building up, with more high-rises going up, especially around Parramatta, as a second CBD. Melbourne has room to sprawl, and it has. The outer suburbs extend far from the city centre. This creates affordability options, but also urban sprawl issues. Melbourne is also building up, with significant development in the CBD and inner suburbs. Walkability? Melbourne wins this one. The city centre and inner suburbs are very walkable, with clear grid layouts. Sydney's hilly terrain and traffic geography make it less walkable in many areas. Bike infrastructure? Both cities are improving, but neither is Amsterdam. Melbourne has better bike lanes in the inner city. Sydney's hills and traffic make cycling more challenging in many areas. Healthcare? Both cities have excellent hospitals and medical facilities. Melbourne has a slight edge with more major hospitals, but you'll get great healthcare in either city. Education? Both have excellent universities. Melbourne has the University of Melbourne and Monash. Sydney has the University of Sydney and UNSW. Quality education is available in both cities at all levels. Green spaces? Sydney has more natural beauty with harbour foreshores, beaches, and national parks close to the city. Melbourne has excellent parks like the Royal Botanic Gardens, but it's more manicured urban green space rather than natural beauty. Livability rankings? This is where Melbourne has historically dominated. Melbourne has repeatedly been ranked as one of the world's most livable cities. Sydney ranks high too, but Melbourne consistently beats it. Why? The combination of culture, cost, infrastructure, and overall quality of life tips in Melbourne's favor. But here's a crucial point. Livability rankings took a hit for Melbourne during COVID. The extended lockdowns affected people's perception of the city. As we move into 2026, it remains to be seen whether Melbourne will regain its crown or if perceptions have permanently shifted. Future outlook. What's coming in 2026? Let's look ahead. What's on the horizon for both cities as we approach 2026? Sydney has massive development happening. Barangaroo is transforming the waterfront with commercial, residential, and recreational spaces. The new Western Sydney Airport is a game changer, opening up new areas for development and creating thousands of jobs. The new airport is expected to be operational by 2026, making Western Sydney a major hub. Sydney is also pushing hard on sustainability and smart city initiatives. There's investment in renewable energy, green buildings, and tech infrastructure. The Tech Central precinct is being developed to rival Silicon Valley and attract global tech companies. The nightlife and entertainment scene in Sydney is recovering post-lockout laws. There's renewed energy in making Sydney a 24-hour city again. More venues are opening, and there's a push to bring back the vibrancy that was lost. Melbourne is building big too. The Metro Tunnel project will transform public transport. Fisherman's Bend is being developed as a new major urban renewal area with huge residential and commercial development. Melbourne is also investing heavily in its innovation precincts and startup ecosystem. Sustainability is huge in Melbourne. The city has ambitious goals for renewable energy, waste reduction, and green spaces. There's a strong focus on becoming carbon neutral and leading in sustainable urban development. The creative and cultural sectors in Melbourne continue to receive investment. New cultural institutions, support for arts and festivals, and maintaining Melbourne's status as Australia's cultural capital are priorities. Population growth? Both cities are growing, but Melbourne was on track to overtake Sydney as Australia's largest city. COVID shifted these projections somewhat, but Melbourne's growth remains strong. By 2026, the gap between the two cities' populations will be smaller than ever. Both cities face challenges: housing affordability, infrastructure strain, climate change impacts. Sydney deals with water security issues and extreme heat events. Melbourne faces challenges with urban sprawl and maintaining livability as the population grows. The rise of remote work could shift dynamics, too. If people can work from anywhere, will they choose Sydney's beauty and weather or Melbourne's affordability and culture? This is still playing out. Investment and business confidence? Both cities attract significant investment. Sydney gets more international investment due to its status as Australia's financial capital. Melbourne attracts investment in education, healthcare, and creative industries. Tourism? Sydney is the bigger international draw with iconic attractions. Melbourne attracts visitors for events, food, and culture. Post-pandemic, both cities are working to rebuild their tourism sectors, which are vital to their economies. The verdict. So, here we are. We've covered cost of living, jobs, lifestyle, culture, weather, infrastructure, and future outlook. Which city wins in 2026? Here's the truth. There is no clear winner, and that's not a cop-out, it's just reality. These are two world-class cities with different strengths and different appeals. Sydney wins if you want beautiful weather, harbor and beaches, higher salaries in finance and corporate sectors, international prestige, outdoor lifestyle, that iconic Australian experience. Melbourne wins if you want lower cost of living, especially housing, diverse job opportunities beyond finance, arts and culture scene, food and coffee culture, laid-back vibe, more European-feeling city, better livability rankings. Your choice depends entirely on what you value. Are you a beach person or a laneway person? Do you prioritize weather or culture? Do you want financial center energy or cultural capital depth? If you're young and career-focused in finance or tech, Sydney might be your move, despite the cost. If you're creative, value quality of life over salary, or want your dollar to stretch further, Melbourne makes sense. If you're raising a family, both offer excellent options. Sydney gives you outdoor lifestyle and beaches. Melbourne gives you affordability and cultural opportunities. Here's my take. Melbourne offers overall better value in 2026. It's cheaper, diverse in opportunities, rich in culture, and consistently livable. But Sydney offers something intangible, that wow factor, that beauty, that energy of being on the world stage. The rivalry will continue because both cities have passionate advocates with legitimate arguments. And honestly, that's what makes Australia great. Having two cities of this caliber competing and pushing each other to be better.